The morning sun cast long shadows across the naval training facility as Sarah Martinez adjusted her shooting stance on the rifle range. At 26 years old, she had already earned a reputation as one of the finest marksmen in the entire Pacific Fleet. Her hands were steady, her breathing controlled, and her focus absolute. The .50 caliber rifle felt like an extension of her body after years of training and combat deployment. Sarah had joined the Navy 6 years earlier, driven by a desire to serve her country and prove that women could excel in any military role. Growing up on a ranch in Texas, she had learned to shoot before she could properly ride a bicycle. Her father, a former Marine, had taught her that precision and discipline were more valuable than brute strength. Those lessons had served her well in the male-dominated world of naval marksmanship. The training facility buzzed with activity as dozens of sailors practiced their shooting skills. Sarah was preparing for the annual inter-service marksmanship competition, an event that drew the best shooters from all branches of the military. She had won the previous year, making her the first woman to claim the top prize in the competition's 30-year history. The victory had brought both praise and unwanted attention. Admiral Richard Blackwood watched from the observation deck overlooking the range. At 58 years old, he commanded significant respect within naval circles, but his reputation had been quietly tarnished by rumors of inappropriate behavior toward female personnel. He had arrived at the facility that morning ostensibly to review training protocols, but his attention seemed focused entirely on Sarah's performance. Sarah fired another perfect shot, the bullet striking the center of a target 800 yards away. The sound echoed across the range as she smoothly operated the bolt action, chambering another round. Her shooting instructor, Chief Petty Officer Williams, nodded approvingly from behind her. Williams had been training marksmen for over 20 years and had never seen anyone with Sarah's natural ability and dedication. The Admiral descended from the observation deck and approached the firing line. Several other sailors noticed his presence and straightened their posture, but Sarah remained focused on her target. She was in the zone, that perfect state of concentration where everything else faded away except the rifle, the target, and the precise moment of firing. Admiral Blackwood positioned himself behind Sarah, ostensibly to observe her technique. Chief Williams felt uncomfortable with the Admiral's proximity, but hesitated to speak up to such a high-ranking officer. The other sailors on the range began to take notice, sensing that something was not quite right about the situation. Sarah fired again, another perfect shot. As she prepared for her next round, she became aware of the Admiral's presence behind her. She had encountered him before at various naval functions and had always felt uneasy around him. There were whispers among the female personnel about his behavior, but no one had ever filed formal complaints. In the military hierarchy, challenging a flag officer required tremendous courage and substantial evidence. The Admiral moved closer, pretending to examine Sarah's shooting position. He began offering unsolicited advice about her stance and grip, despite the fact that her performance clearly demonstrated superior skill. Sarah politely acknowledged his comments while maintaining her focus on the target's downrange. She was determined not to let his presence disrupt her training session. Other personnel on the range began to notice the uncomfortable dynamic developing. Chief Williams stepped closer, ready to intervene if necessary, though he was unsure how to handle a situation involving such a senior officer. The tension in the air was palpable as Sarah prepared for another shot. Admiral Blackwood's comments became more personal, shifting from technical advice to inappropriate observations about Sarah's appearance and physical attributes. Sarah's jaw tightened, but she maintained her professional composure. Years of military training had taught her to control her emotions, even in challenging situations. As Sarah lined up her next shot, the Admiral reached forward under the pretense of adjusting her rifle position. His hand moved toward the stock of the .50 caliber weapon, but his intentions seemed far from professional. Sarah felt his approach and realized that this was crossing a line that should never be crossed. The moment hung suspended in time. Other sailors on the range had stopped their own training to observe what was happening. Chief Williams took a step forward, his face showing concern and barely controlled anger. The Admiral's hand continued its trajectory toward Sarah's weapon and, by extension, toward inappropriate contact with her person. Sarah's mind raced through her options. She could continue to endure the harassment silently, as many women in the military felt compelled to do. She could report the incident through proper channels, though she knew such reports often went nowhere when they involved high-ranking officers. Or she could take immediate action to defend herself and her dignity. The weight of years of similar incidents, suffered by herself and countless other women in uniform, pressed down on her shoulders. She thought about all the times she had been forced to smile politely while enduring inappropriate comments and unwanted attention. She remembered the stories shared quietly among female personnel about encounters with powerful men who believed their rank gave them license to behave however they pleased. Sarah's training kicked in, not just her marksmanship training, but her combat training and her ingrained sense of self-preservation and dignity. As the Admiral's hand reached for her rifle, she made a decision that would change everything. The time for silent endurance had passed. The moment for action had arrived. The .50 caliber rifle remained steady in her grip as she prepared to demonstrate that some lines should never be crossed, regardless of rank or position. The other personnel on the range watched with growing anticipation, sensing that they were about to witness something significant. Chief Williams moved closer, ready to support whatever action Sarah might take. Sarah's breathing remained controlled, her stance solid, and her resolve absolute. She had spent years perfecting her skills with weapons and had never hesitated to use those skills in defense of her country. Now she was about to discover whether she was equally prepared to use them in defense of her own dignity and self-respect. The Admiral's hand continued its inappropriate advance, unaware that he was about to encounter resistance from someone who had been trained to respond decisively to threats. Sarah's years of military service had prepared her for many challenging situations, but this moment would test everything she had learned about courage, principle, and the willingness to stand up for what was right, regardless of the potential consequences. The moment Admiral Blackwood's hand made contact with Sarah's rifle, attempting to guide it while simultaneously making unwanted physical contact with her, Sarah's reflexes took over. Years of combat training and self-defense instruction crystallized into a single, decisive action. Without releasing her grip on the rifle, she twisted sharply to her left, using the momentum to break the Admiral's hold while simultaneously driving her elbow backward into his solar plexus. The Admiral stumbled backward, gasping for breath and completely unprepared for Sarah's reaction. His face registered shock and confusion as he struggled to maintain his balance. The other personnel on the range stood frozen, witnessing a scene that would be talked about for years to come. Chief Williams moved quickly to position himself between Sarah and the Admiral, though his sympathies were clearly with his student. Sarah maintained control of her weapon throughout the encounter, demonstrating the discipline and training that had made her one of the Navy's finest marksmen. She turned to face the Admiral directly, her stance professional but unmistakably defensive. Her voice was calm and controlled as she spoke, though everyone present could hear the steel beneath her words. "Sir, I must ask you to maintain appropriate distance while I complete my training exercise," Sarah said, her tone respectful but firm. The Admiral's face reddened with both embarrassment and anger. He was clearly unaccustomed to being challenged by anyone, let alone a junior officer. The incident had unfolded in full view of more than a dozen other personnel, making it impossible to ignore or cover up. Chief Williams stepped forward and addressed the Admiral with carefully measured words. "Sir, if you would like to observe marksmanship training, I would be happy to provide you with a position in the observation area where you can see all our shooters without interfering with their exercises." His suggestion was polite, but carried an unmistakable message about maintaining appropriate boundaries. Admiral Blackwood attempted to regain his composure and authority. He began to bluster about disrespect and insubordination, but his words fell flat in the face of what everyone had witnessed. Several of the other sailors exchanged glances, silently communicating their support for Sarah's actions. Word of the incident would spread quickly through the base, as military gossip always did. Sarah turned back toward her targets, demonstrating remarkable composure under the circumstances. She chambered another round and resumed her shooting position, though she remained acutely aware of the Admiral's presence and movements. The tension on the range was thick enough to cut with a knife, but Sarah was determined to complete her training session and prove that she would not be intimidated. The Admiral made another attempt to assert his authority, this time demanding that Sarah accompany him to his office for a discussion about proper military protocol. Sarah politely but firmly declined, stating that she was required to complete her scheduled training time and that any discussions should take place through proper channels with her commanding officer present. Chief Williams supported Sarah's position, explaining that the training schedule was mandated by fleet requirements and could not be interrupted without proper authorization. He offered to arrange a meeting through appropriate channels if the Admiral wished to discuss training protocols. His intervention provided Sarah with the backing she needed to resist the Admiral's attempts at intimidation. As the standoff continued, Sarah made a decision that would demonstrate her skill and resolve in a way that no one would ever forget. She announced that she would complete a precision shooting demonstration, engaging 6 targets at varying distances and angles. The targets were positioned at ranges from 400 to 1,000 yards, each requiring different calculations for wind, elevation, and bullet drop. Sarah's announcement caught everyone's attention, including the Admiral's. Precision shooting under stress was one of the most challenging aspects of marksmanship, and attempting such a demonstration while dealing with harassment and confrontation showed incredible confidence and mental strength. Chief Williams nodded his approval, understanding that Sarah was about to make a statement that would extend far beyond the shooting range. The first target was positioned at 400 yards, a standard distance for military marksmen. Sarah settled into her shooting position, controlled her breathing, and fired. The bullet struck the center of the target with precision that drew murmurs of appreciation from the observing sailors. She worked the bolt action smoothly, ejecting the spent cartridge and chambering a fresh round. The second target was at 600 yards and positioned at a slight angle, requiring compensation for the changed perspective. Sarah adjusted her scope, calculated the necessary corrections, and fired again. Another perfect shot, striking exactly where she had intended. The Admiral watched with growing amazement and frustration, realizing that he was witnessing something extraordinary. Target 3 was positioned at 800 yards, the distance Sarah had been practicing when the Admiral first approached. This shot required precise calculation of bullet drop and wind drift. Sarah took her time, reading the wind indicators and making minute adjustments to her aim. When she fired, the bullet found its mark with mechanical precision. The fourth target presented the greatest challenge yet, positioned at 900 yards and partially obscured by a small obstacle that required shooting through a narrow gap. Sarah studied the target through her scope, calculating angles and trajectories with the expertise of someone who had spent years perfecting her craft. Her shot threaded the needle, striking the target cleanly despite the difficult angle. By this point, word of Sarah's demonstration had spread beyond the immediate range area. Other personnel began arriving to witness the display of marksmanship that was unfolding. Even some officers who had been working in nearby buildings came to observe, drawn by reports of an extraordinary shooting exhibition in progress. The fifth target was positioned at the maximum effective range of the rifle, 1,000 yards away. At this distance, factors like the rotation of the Earth began to affect bullet trajectory, requiring calculations that most marksmen found challenging under ideal conditions. Sarah was attempting this shot while dealing with the stress and adrenaline of her confrontation with the Admiral. Sarah took extra time preparing for the fifth shot, making careful adjustments to her scope and position. She controlled her breathing, waited for a lull in the wind, and squeezed the trigger with the smooth, consistent pressure that her father had taught her years earlier. The bullet traveled for what seemed like an eternity before striking the distant target, another perfect hit. The crowd of observers had grown to include more than 30 people, all watching in amazement as Sarah prepared for her final shot. The sixth target was positioned at 850 yards, but presented a unique challenge. It was a moving target, designed to simulate real-world combat conditions where enemies did not remain stationary. Admiral Blackwood watched with a mixture of anger and grudging respect as Sarah prepared for her final shot. He was beginning to realize that he had chosen to harass someone whose skills and composure far exceeded anything he had imagined. The incident was no longer just about inappropriate behavior. It had become a demonstration of the exceptional capabilities that the Admiral had attempted to diminish and dismiss. Sarah studied the moving target through her scope, calculating the complex mathematics required for a successful shot. The target moved in a predictable pattern, but timing the shot required split-second precision and years of experience. She would have only one opportunity to make this shot count, and everyone watching understood the difficulty of what she was attempting. The silence on the range was absolute as Sarah tracked the target's movement. Even Admiral Blackwood had stopped his protests and demands, transfixed by the display of skill he was witnessing. Sarah's breathing slowed to the deep, rhythmic pattern that all expert marksmen learn to control. She followed the target's path, leading it slightly to account for the time the bullet would take to travel the distance. At the perfect moment, Sarah squeezed the trigger. The rifle fired with its characteristic thunderous report, and the bullet streaked toward its distant target. For what seemed like an eternity, everyone watched and waited. Then the target jerked and spun as the bullet found its mark, completing Sarah's perfect demonstration of 6 consecutive hits under the most challenging circumstances imaginable. The explosion of applause and cheers from the gathered personnel was spontaneous and overwhelming. Sailors who had watched the entire confrontation unfold expressed their admiration not just for Sarah's marksmanship, but for her courage in standing up to harassment while maintaining her professionalism and composure. Chief Williams beamed with pride, knowing that he had trained someone truly exceptional. Admiral Blackwood stood among the cheering crowd, his face a mixture of emotions. The anger and embarrassment were still there, but they were now combined with a grudging respect for Sarah's abilities and a growing awareness that his behavior had been witnessed by dozens of personnel who would not easily forget what they had seen. Sarah stood and cleared her rifle, following proper safety protocols even in the midst of the celebration around her. She had made her point in a way that no amount of arguing or reporting could have achieved. Every person present had witnessed not only her exceptional skill, but also her refusal to be intimidated or diminished by someone who had attempted to use his position of authority inappropriately. Captain, Sarah's commanding officer, arrived at the range just as the demonstration concluded. He had been summoned by reports of the incident and came prepared to deal with what he expected to be a disciplinary matter. Instead, he found himself witnessing the aftermath of one of the most impressive displays of marksmanship anyone could remember. Chief Williams quickly briefed Captain on what had transpired, carefully explaining both the Admiral's inappropriate behavior and Sarah's professional response. Other witnesses stepped forward to corroborate the account, making it clear that Sarah had acted appropriately throughout the entire incident while demonstrating extraordinary skill under pressure. Admiral Blackwood attempted to salvage the situation by praising Sarah's shooting ability while downplaying the earlier confrontation. However, his efforts fell flat with an audience that had witnessed the entire sequence of events. The damage to his reputation was significant and would follow him for the remainder of his career. Captain took charge of the situation, formally documenting the incident while ensuring that Sarah received appropriate protection from any potential retaliation. He had served in the Navy for over 20 years and had rarely seen such a clear-cut case of inappropriate behavior being addressed so effectively by the victim herself. In the days that followed, Sarah's actions became the subject of intense discussion throughout the naval base and beyond. Word spread through military networks about the female marksman who had defended herself against a flag officer's harassment, and then demonstrated her exceptional abilities in a way that left no doubt about her competence and professionalism. The incident had far-reaching consequences. Admiral Blackwood faced a formal investigation into his conduct, not just regarding the incident with Sarah, but also concerning other complaints that had been quietly suppressed over the years. Several women came forward with their own stories, feeling empowered by Sarah's example to speak out about harassment they had endured. Sarah continued her training and preparation for the inter-service marksmanship competition, though she now did so with enhanced security measures and heightened awareness of her surroundings. The incident had made her something of a celebrity within military circles, but she remained focused on her duties and her commitment to excellence. The competition arrived several weeks later, drawing competitors from all branches of the military. Sarah's reputation preceded her, and many participants had heard about her confrontation with Admiral Blackwood and the remarkable shooting demonstration that followed. She felt additional pressure to perform well, knowing that many people were watching to see if she could maintain her high standards. Sarah not only defended her championship title, but set new records in multiple categories. Her performance was flawless, demonstrating that the stress and publicity surrounding the earlier incident had not affected her ability to perform when it mattered most. Her victory was celebrated throughout the Navy as proof that merit and skill would ultimately prevail over harassment and intimidation. The incident became a turning point in military policy regarding harassment and the treatment of female personnel. Sarah's refusal to accept inappropriate behavior, combined with her demonstration of exceptional competence, provided a powerful example that inspired changes in training protocols and disciplinary procedures. Admiral Blackwood's career effectively ended with the investigation into his conduct. He was quietly reassigned to a desk position with no personnel responsibilities and eventually retired earlier than planned. The message was clear that such behavior would no longer be tolerated, regardless of rank or position. Sarah's story spread beyond military circles, inspiring women in all walks of life who faced similar challenges in male-dominated professions. Her combination of professional excellence and personal courage provided a model for how to respond to harassment while maintaining dignity and effectiveness. Years later, Sarah would be promoted to senior positions within the Navy, eventually becoming one of the highest-ranking female officers in naval history. She never forgot the lesson she learned on that shooting range, that the best response to those who would diminish your worth is to demonstrate your exceptional value through your actions and achievements. The 6 targets Sarah hit that day became symbolic of something much larger than marksmanship. They represented precision, courage, professionalism, and the refusal to accept anything less than the respect that every service member deserves. Her story continued to inspire new generations of military personnel, proving that excellence and integrity would always triumph over abuse of power and harassment.